If she's too much trouble, send her back by the next moon. We won't hold you to keeping her. That was the first thing anyone said to me about the woman who would become my whole world. Not her name, not a word about who she was, just that, the way a man returns a lame horse, apologizing in advance for the sale. The envoy who said it stood on the far side of my river gate with rain sheeting off the brim of his hood, and behind him, ankle-deep in the churning ford, stood a woman in a gray traveling cloak so soaked it had gone black at the hem. She did not shiver. I remember that before I remember her face. The night was cold for the green season, the Suriach running high and brown with monsoon, and every one of the pharaoh men hunched against the wet like beaten dogs. She stood straight as a lantern pole and did not shiver, and something in me, the part I had long ago stopped listening to, lifted its head. "You are Haldin," I said to the envoy, "steward of the pharaoh." "I am Alpha King." He bowed, too low, the way men bow when they want something forgiven before they've finished asking for it. "We've come to pay what the Highlands owe, the blood debt for the raid 3 winters past. 12 of your hunters dead at the pass. I know it, I carry the shame of it. My people cannot pay in cattle, we have no cattle left. We cannot pay in silver, we have no silver." He gestured behind him, and the rain seemed to gesture with him, and the woman in gray lifted her chin a fraction, as if she already knew what shape the sentence would take. "So the pharaoh send you our finest, a gift worthy of a king. Take her as Luna or as servant or as you please. The debt is paid." I had ruled Alvith for 11 years. I had heard men lie in every register a throat can make. And I knew, the way you know the smell of a coming storm, that Haldin the steward believed he was cheating me. He thought he was handing me a burden dressed as a treasure, a white gift, the kind the old stories mock, a beast too holy to work and too costly to feed, given precisely because no one wanted the keeping of it. He thought I would look at a rain-drowned woman with no dowry and no pack of note and no wolf anyone had ever seen, and I would take her out of pride, and then I would spend the rest of my years fed and clothed and humiliated by the joke of her. "Send her back by the next moon," he said. He was already planning how the Highlands would laugh. "Come out of the water," I said. Not to him, to her. She came. She did not look at Haldin for permission, and she did not look at me for approval. She simply gathered the ruined cloak in one fist and climbed the ford stones one by one, sure-footed, and came up under the gate arch out of the worst of the rain. Up close she was younger than I'd guessed and older than she should have looked. There were years in her eyes that hadn't been kind, and her face was the plain, quiet kind that the world walks past 1,000 times and never sees, until the one time it stops and cannot look away. I would learn that one time. "What is your name?" I asked. "Neve," she said, just that. Her voice was low and even, a voice that had learned to take up no more room than it was given. "Of the pharaoh, for now." For now, Haldin didn't catch it. I did. There was a whole life folded into those 2 words, and I wanted absurdly immediately to unfold it. My second Bracken came down through the rain from the hall with 2 of the guard, and I saw his jaw set the moment he understood what was standing at my gate. Bracken had buried a brother at that pass 3 winters gone. He had wanted the pharaoh to pay in pharaoh blood, and he had said so loudly for 3 years, and here instead was one thin woman in a wet cloak, and I watched the insult of it land on him like a slap. "This is the payment," Bracken said. He did not lower his voice. "1 girl for 12 hunters. My Alpha, this is a joke told at our expense. Send her back with a whip scar to remember us by and let the Highlands know." "Bracken," I did not raise my voice either. I have never needed to. "You will not speak of a whip in front of a guest at my gate." "She is not a guest, she is a debt." "She is standing in my hall out of the rain," I said, "and that makes her a guest until I say otherwise, and I have not said otherwise." He went quiet, but he looked at Neve the way the whole hall would look at her for the days to come, as a thing sent to shame us, a burden to be endured or discarded, and she felt it. I saw her feel it, and I saw her decide, in the space of a breath, not to let it bend her spine. She had clearly made that decision many times before. She had a great deal of practice at it. There is a rite in Alvith older than the hall itself for the settling of debts. The pledge cup. A cup of river water and moon salt is shared between the one who owes and the one who is owed, hand over hand, and when both have drunk, the debt is spoken done and cannot be raised again. It is a cold, plain ceremony. It has ended wars. Haldin had clearly rehearsed it, because he produced from his pack a traveling cup of dented tin and the little twist of salt, and he began to speak the old words in the flat, rushing way of a man reading a bill of sale. The pharaoh owe the blood of 12. The pharaoh pay in the person of this woman Neve, given freely and forever. Not by her, I said. Haldane stopped. Alpha King. You said given freely, I looked at Neve. Was it freely on your part? The hall went very still. This was not in the right. This was not a question anyone asks. A debt token is not consulted about her own passing, any more than a coin is asked whether it wishes to be spent. Bracken made a sound of pure disbelief. Haldane's face did something complicated because he could not say no. We forced her, not in a rival king's hall, and he could not say yes. She chose it because I could see from here that she had not. But Neve answered before he could. She looked at me, really looked, the first time our eyes fully met, and I felt it then. The thing I had told myself for 11 years was a young man's fable. My mother had spoken of it once near the end, of how it had struck my father the first time he saw her across a thrashing floor, like a cold house when the fire finally catches. I had decided long ago that she'd embellished, that no such thing waited for me, that some men are simply born to rule alone, and I had made my peace with being one of them. The way you make peace with a bad knee, you stop expecting the stairs to be easy. And then this rain-drowned woman looked at me across the pledge cup, and every cold room in me caught fire at once. It was not freely, Neve said, quiet, unashamed. My people chose it for me. I was told this morning on the road. I did not choose to be given away, Alpha King. But I chose to walk the last mile up your ford on my own feet rather than be dragged. That much was mine. Haldane hissed her name like a curse. Bracken stared. And I who had not felt my own heart in 11 years except as the muscle that kept me upright. I understood in that moment that the pharaoh had made the single greatest mistake in the long history of their small and desperate pack. They had tried to pay me a debt with the one thing in the world I would have burned every ledger in Alvath to possess. They had wrapped my fated mate in a wet gray cloak and handed her over as a joke, and stood there certain I'd send her back. I took the cup from Haldane's hand. The right is changed, I said. Neve of the pharaoh, I take no person as payment. A person is not a coin. The blood debt of 12 stands unpaid tonight, and I will speak with the pharaoh about it in daylight, in silver or in grain or in labor as free men settle. I heard Bracken exhale relief, I thought, that I would not simply forgive the pass. He did not yet understand what came next. But you are cold and you are far from your highlands, and no one leaves my gate into that river in the dark. So I offer you not as debt, not as gift, not as servant. I offer you shelter under my roof, freely, as I would offer any soul the storm caught out. And in the morning, if you wish to go home, I will send you with an escort and provisions and no debt owed. And if you wish to stay a while, you may stay. The choice is yours, and it will stay yours. That is the only right I care to keep tonight. I have led charges into the teeth of the northern packs. I have stood alone before a council of 9 alphas who wanted me dead, and talked my way back out the door. I have never in my life been as frightened as I was in the silence after I said that, waiting to see what she would do with a choice, when it was plain from the set of her shoulders that no one had offered her one in a very long time. Neve looked at the cup in my hand. She looked at the black doorway behind me and the warm light past it, and the rain and Haldane's furious face and her own thin fingers. I'll stay the night, she said, and decide in the morning. Thank you, Alpha King. And when I held out the pledge cup, not for a debt now, only so she might drink and warm herself, her hand closed over mine on the cold tin, and the bond struck through me like heat flooding a hearth left cold since childhood, and I nearly dropped the cup into the mud. She felt nothing, or she felt something and had learned long ago to give no sign of what she felt. I would spend a long time learning which. But I knew from that first touch, with the bone certainty a wolf is given exactly once. This one, or no one for the rest of my days. The pharaoh had handed me my mate, and told me I could send her back by the next moon. I let Haldane sleep in the guardhouse, and ride out at dawn thinking he'd cheated me. Let him carry that all the way up the mountain. Let the highlands laugh. By the time they understood, it would be far, far too late. I brought Neve into the hall of Alvath and gave her the truth of nothing and the warmth of everything, and I watched her stand in the doorway of my great teak room with the lanterns throwing gold across the wet floor. And I thought, the rest of my life begins tonight, and she does not even know it yet. I did not tell her, not that night. A man does not tell a woman she is bound to him forever an hour after her own people have handed her away like a sack of grain. That is not devotion, that is another cage with a kinder lock. If she was mine, and she was, the bond does not lie. Then she would have to come to me freely or not at all, and I would rather have wanted her every day of a long life than have owned her a single hour. So I said none of it. I had a chamber made ready with a fire and dry clothes and hot broth, and I posted no guard on her door. I made a point of it, told the housewoman Ilsa to leave it plain and let Neve hear me say it. No lock, no watch. She may walk to the gate whenever she wishes, and my men will open it for her. I saw her mark that. I saw her not believe it, and then slowly, over the hour it took the fire to dry her hair, begin to. Why, she asked me, at the door of the chamber, when I brought the broth myself, because I could not make myself hand the task to anyone else. You gain nothing, the debt is unpaid. You could have taken me and paid nothing, and no one would have faulted you. Every Alpha I've ever heard of would have taken me. Why this? I could have told her, because you are my fated mate, and I would sooner cut off my own hand than take you as a coin. It sat behind my teeth, that truth, heavy as a stone. Because I have kept ledgers all my life, I said instead, and I have learned there are two kinds of things in the world. The kind you can put in a ledger and the kind you cannot. Cattle and silver and grain go in the ledger. A person does not. If I let a person be written into a ledger even once, I've lost something I can't buy back, the difference between a king and a man who merely holds the whip. I'd rather owe the pharaoh forever than become that. I set the broth in her hands. That's all, eat, sleep, decide nothing tonight. She looked at me a long moment. You talk like a man who's disappointed somebody once and never forgave himself. I had not expected that. It went in under the armor clean as a blade. Good night, Neve of the Pharaoh, I said, and left before she could see what her aim had cost me. I did not sleep. I sat by the long window of my own room with the rain easing to a drip off the eaves, and I listened to the hall breathe, and once near the deepest hour I heard her door open. I did not move. I heard her bare feet on the teak, soft, testing, walking to the gate, I thought, to see if I had told the truth about the lock. My whole body went still as stone. If she wanted to go, I would let her go. I had said so, and a man is only worth the last promise he keeps. Her footsteps went to the gate, stood there a while, and then came back. She had gone to check that the door would open for her. It did. And knowing she was free to leave, she had chosen, for one night, only one night, I told myself, to stay. I put my forehead against the cold window frame and I breathed, and the pale wolf that lives in the Alvith forest, the one my people call the moon wolf and no man has touched in living memory, howled once, far off, low and long, as if it too had felt the hearth catch. Morning came green and dripping. She did not ask for the escort home. She did not ask the next morning either. I want to tell you it was my doing, that I courted her, dazzled her, won her with the graces of a king. It was not. What kept Neve at Alvith those first days was not me at all. It was the pack. Or rather, it was the pack's oldest wound, laid bare in front of her within a day, because Alvith is not a gentle hold, and I have never pretended otherwise. My pack runs half wild. That is the truth the Pharaoh did not know when they mocked us, and the truth Bracken carried like a private grief. 11 years back, when I took the hold, a sickness swept the wolves, not the men, the wolf forms, the beast selves we carry, and it left a whole generation of my strongest touched with a restlessness that never fully healed. They startle, they snap. The young ones especially, born after the sickness, raised by wolves who flinch, they grow up wary as trapped things, and no healer I have ever brought to Alvith could do more than dull it with smoke and bitter root. I had made my peace with a pack that loved fiercely and trusted nothing, myself first among them. On Neve's second morning, one of those young ones, a boy of the pack, barely into his first shift, a skinny, fierce child named Toby, whose mother had died in the sickness, and who trusted exactly no one, took a fever. The bad kind, the kind that rides in on the monsoon and settles in the chest. And in a wolf child the fever brings the shift on wrong, half and half, the body caught between forms and unable to choose, which is a torment to watch and a danger to touch. 3 of my strongest could not hold him. He had raked Ilsa's arm to the bone and driven the healer from the room, and I had come down myself. And I stood in that low, smoky chamber knowing there was nothing to do but wait and hope the fever broke before the boy tore himself apart. Neve walked past me into the room. Don't, Bracken snapped, reaching for her. He'll kill you, girl, he's half-turned, he doesn't know his own. She wasn't listening. She had crossed to the pallet where Toby thrashed, fur breaking through skin in patches, eyes rolled white, and she knelt, in reach of teeth that had opened Ilsa to the bone, and she did not touch him. That was the thing. Every healer I'd brought had reached for the child. She didn't. She sat back on her heels just out of his reach, and she began, very low, to hum. Not a lullaby I knew. Some Highland tune, thin and strange, a shepherd's song by the sound, the kind you sing to sheep on a mountain in the dark to tell them the shape of the night. And she hummed it and she waited, and she let the boy come to the edge of his own violence and find, each time, that the thing kneeling beside him was not afraid. That was her whole art, I would learn. She was not afraid. Not of the fever, not of the teeth, not of the great pale moon wolf, not of me. She had lived so long braced against a world that had never once been kind to her that she had passed all the way through fear and out the far side into a terrible, gentle steadiness, and animals and children and half-wild wolves. And God help me, an 11 years lonely king could all feel at the moment they came near her, like the first still air after a storm. Toby stopped thrashing. He came half out of the shift, panting, a boy again with wolf eyes, and he stared at this stranger who had not run, and Niamh stopped humming and said in the plainest voice in the world, "There now, that's the worst of it. You held on. Well done." And she wet a cloth from the basin and laid it, now, only now that he'd chosen to let her, across his burning forehead, and the boy who trusted no one in the world put his face against her wrist and slept. I stood in the doorway of that room, and I understood a second thing about my mate on top of the first. She had been keeping people alive her whole life, and no one had ever thanked her for it. I learned the rest in pieces over the green days that followed because I could not stay away from her, and she, slowly, warily, a soul unlearning the certainty that every open door is a trap, let me near. She had been born the fourth daughter of a pharaoh line, already 3 daughters too poor. Her mother died young. Her wolf, when it came pale and quiet and small. No white lunar out of the old songs, nothing that silences an arena, just a small pale wolf that liked the dark and healed things and made no noise, which in a hard Highland pack that needed warriors was worse than no wolf at all. They called her half-maid. They called her the Runtluna, a title meant to wound twice over. And when a rival within the pharaoh, a woman named Seth, ambitious, who wanted her own daughter raised to the pack's lunaseat, needed the quiet 4th daughter out of the way, and the blood debt to Alvith came due at the same moment, the two problems solved each other. Send Niamh. Pay the debt with the girl no one will miss. Let the Southern King have the runt. That was the joke Haldane had been so pleased with. That was the white gift, the burden dressed as treasure. They had spent 11 years telling Niamh she was worth nothing, and then they had proved it by spending her. And she had known. That was the part that undid me. She had known all of it, known she was being handed away as trash, and she had still climbed my ford on her own 2 feet with her chin up rather than give them the satisfaction of dragging her. Every scrap of pride left in that woman she had wrung out of a life that gave her none, and she had brought it up my river stones and set it down in front of me like the only coin she owned. I stopped keeping the distance a king keeps. I could not help it. I found reasons to walk where she walked. When she tended the young wolves, and by the end of that first week half, the touched pups of Alvith would let no hands but hers near them, and the mothers who had flinched for 11 years watched with tears standing in their eyes. I found myself standing at the edge of the yard doing nothing at all, watching her hands. When she took her supper alone, because Bracken's cold looks had taught her to, I began taking mine at the same low table, unasked, and I would talk about nothing, the river, the ledgers, the old moon wolf in the trees, and she would answer in her low, even voice, and the hour would pass, and I would go to my cold room and lie awake grateful and afraid in equal measure. Because I still had not told her. And the bond, which I had thought I understood, was not a comfortable thing to carry silently. It pulled. Not the way the songs say, not a leash, not a hunger. It was gentler and worse than that. It was the sense, every hour of every day, that the missing half of some sum I'd been failing to total my whole life was sitting 3 feet away humming to a sick child, and that I was forbidden by my own honor from saying so until she was free enough to hear it and mean her answer. On the 9th day, the moon wolf came out of the forest. No one had touched the pale wolf of Alvith in 3 generations. It is not one of the pack. It is older than the pack, something the first alphas of this hold are said to have made a bargain with, a moon thing, a guardian, a ghost with fur, the stories disagree, and I had always half believed it was only a very old, very white wolf that our grandfathers had dressed in legend. It kept to the deep trees. It watched. Once or twice a year a hunter glimpsed it and came back pale, and that was all. On the 9th day, Niamh went to the forest's edge at dusk to gather fever root. She had taken over the healing entirely by then, and none of us dared say she shouldn't, and the moonwolf walked out of the ferns and lay down at her feet. I saw it. I had followed her, as I followed her everywhere by then, At a distance, I told myself was proper and was not. I came through the trees and I stopped dead, because there in the blue dusk stood my mate with one hand resting on the great pale head of a creature that had refused every living soul in Alveth for 100 years, and the wolf had its eyes closed, and Neve was humming the shepherd's song under her breath as if it were nothing, as if the oldest guardian of my hold were a stray dog that had wandered up for scratching. She looked up and saw me. She did not take her hand away. "He's very old," she said softly of the wolf, "and very tired, and no one has touched him in so long he'd forgotten he wanted it." She looked down at the pale head under her palm and then up at me, and something in her face was open in a way I had not yet earned. "I know what that's like. So I thought I'd sit with him a while. I know what that's like. My mate telling me, telling the wolf, telling the dusk, telling anyone but me directly, that she had been so long untouched by kindness she'd forgotten she was allowed to want it. I have never in my life so badly wanted to cross a stretch of ground. I did not. I stood in the ferns and I said, because it was all I trusted my voice to hold, "Stay as long as you like, both of you. The forest is yours." And that night, when she came back to the hall with Feverroot in her basket, and the moon-wolf padding a courtly distance behind her like an aged knight escorting a queen, my pack, my hard, half-wild, distrustful pack that had bowed to nothing but strength in 11 years, went quiet in the yard and watched her pass. And one by one, without a signal, without a word, they lowered their heads. Not to me. I was standing right there, and it was not to me. Bracken saw it. Bracken, who had wanted her whipped and sent back with a scar, stood in the torchlight and watched the wolves of Alveth bow to the Runtluna the Pharaoh had thrown away, and I watched 3 years of grief and a lifetime of certainty crack down the middle of my second's face. He did not bow that night. He was not ready, but he did not look at her again the way he had, and that was the first stone out of the wall. I decided, standing in that yard, that I would tell her the truth. She had been at Alveth 10 days by then. She had checked the gate a dozen times and found it open a dozen times and chosen, each time, to stay. She was as free as I could make a woman who had nowhere kind to go. It was time she knew what she was choosing between. It was not fair otherwise. She should not go on staying without knowing that one of the 2 men in the yard had loved her since the pledge cup and would love her past his own death. I did not get the chance that night, because the next morning the Pharaoh came back. Not Haldane. Haldane was only a steward, and a steward does not undo a bargain his betters have begun to regret. It was Seth herself, the rival, the woman who had spent Neve to clear the lunaseat for her own daughter, riding down out of the highlands with a dozen armed at her back, and a face like a blade that has just realized it was thrown away with the meat. Because word travels. Word had gone up the mountain. The Southern King had not sent the runt back by the next moon. The Southern King's dead wolves had woken to her hands. The Southern King's ancient moon guardian had lain at her feet. And the Pharaoh, poor, proud, desperate Pharaoh, had understood, too late, exactly as I'd known they would, that they had not paid a debt with a worthless girl. They had handed the wealthiest king in the green country the one treasure their whole mountain could not have bought, and they wanted it back. Seth came into my hall with the rain at her heels, and made her bow, and did not mean a hair of it. "Alpha King of Alveth," smooth as river stone, "there has been a grave error. The blood debt was to be paid in a person of worth, and my steward in his haste gave you a servant, a sickly girl of no line, half-made, unfit to stand in a king's hall. The insult to you is unbearable. I have come to correct it. I bring you my own daughter, Mela, trained, strong, a true lunar of the blood, to settle the debt properly, and to take the wretched creature home where she belongs out of your sight." Behind her, a tall girl in fine furs looked at the teak hall with hungry eyes. And there it was, the whole ugly truth of it, laid on my floor in front of the pack. When Neve was worth nothing, they had spent her without a thought. Now that she had been shown, by my wolves and my forest and my own helpless heart, to be worth everything, they had come to take her back and try again to profit off her, and they had not the shame to blush while they did it. I looked past Seth to where Neve stood at the side of the hall. She had gone very still, that trained, learned stillness. The stillness of a woman who has heard herself discussed as property her whole life and knows the safest thing is to make no sound. But her eyes had come up, and they were on me, and in them was a question I would remember to the end of my days. "Will you too?" That was the question. "Now that they've raised the price, will you send me back for a better one? Or trade me up? Everyone always has, will you?" She thought I might. That is the thing I cannot forgive the Pharaoh past all the rest. They had done such thorough work of teaching her that she was a coin that even now, even after the gate, she was always free to leave, and the wolves that bowed and the forest that opened to her. Some deep old part of her stood braced for me to reach across and take the shinier coin off the table. I stood up from my chair. "Seth of the Pharaoh," I said, "you have ridden a long way to insult me twice in one speech, and I'll give you the courtesy of answering both insults plainly, so you can carry them home clear. The first insult is to me. You say you handed me a servant of no worth, and now you'll bring me a better one, as if I am a merchant to be traded up with, as if a luna is a length of cloth I hold to the light and exchange when a finer bolt comes in. I am the Alpha King of Alvith. I do not trade in people at all, and any king who does is a smaller thing than a king. You may take your daughter home. She is welcome as a guest, and she is nothing to me as a bargain, and there is no debt on this earth I will pay or accept in the currency of a human soul." Mela's hungry face fell. Seth's did not move. "The blood debt of the past will be paid, and paid in full, but in silver and in grain, and in the labor of free pharaoh hands rebuilding what your raid broke. As I told your steward, it would be settled, in daylight, between free people. That debt is mine to collect, and I will collect it. It has nothing to do with the woman standing at the side of my hall." "Then give her back," Seth said, and now the smoothness cracked and the real thing showed through, the greed and the fear of it. "She is Pharaoh, she is ours. You said yourself she is no payment, so she is not yours to keep. Return her." And that was the second insult, and it was the one that mattered, and I turned from Seth entirely, turned my back on a Pharaoh Alpha in my own hall, which is an answer all its own, and I crossed the floor to where Neve stood, and I stopped an arm's length from her, close enough to speak low, far enough that it was still her choice, always her choice, and I said the thing I should have said 10 days before. "Neve," my voice was not steady. I let it not be steady. "You are not mine to keep, and Seth is right, and I want you to hear that first. You belong to no one, not to the Pharaoh, not to Alvith, not to me. You are a free soul, and the gate has been open every hour since you came, and it is open now, and if you want to walk out of it, to go home, or to go anywhere, or to be rid of the both of us and every pack that ever spent you, I will open it myself and send you with everything you need, and you will owe me nothing, and I will grieve, and I will let you go. But I will not let you go believing you were ever worth nothing, because it is the one lie in this hall I cannot stand to leave standing. The night they handed you to me at the gate, when your hand closed over mine on the pledge cup, the bond struck me, the fated bond. The one the old wolves are given once in a life or never. You are my mate, Neve, mine fated true. I have known it from the first hour, and I said nothing, because I would sooner have wanted you every day of a long life than owned you a single hour, because you had been owned enough, and you deserved to choose. The wolves did not bow to me in the yard. The moon wolf did not lie down for me. They know what I know. They knew you the moment you walked up my river, the same as I did. The Pharaoh gave you away certain they were handing me a burden nobody wanted. They handed me the one thing in the whole green country I had stopped letting myself hope for. Not a debt, not a gift, not a coin, the other half of my own life. And I have loved you quietly and completely for 10 days, and I will go on loving you whether you stay or go. So choose knowing that, choose free, but choose knowing you were never, not for 1 hour of your life, worth nothing. Whatever they told you, it was always a lie." The hall was silent as the bottom of a well. Seth had gone the color of old ash. Mela was staring. Bracken near the door had a hand pressed over his own mouth. And Neve, my Neve, who had stood braced against a lifetime of cruelty and never once let it bend her, Neve began, silently, to cry, in the way of someone who has forgotten they were allowed to, tears simply spilling over while her face stayed still, as if her body had made a decision the rest of her hadn't caught up to. "Say it again," she whispered. "The bond, say you're sure." "I have never been surer of anything in my life," I said, "and I never will be again." She looked down at her own hands, turned them over, looked at her right wrist. I don't know what made her look there, the bond perhaps, or some knowing older than either of us, and even as she looked, even as the whole hall watched, the mark rose. Silver, thin as frostline, curling up the pale skin of her wrist in the shape of the mate mark I have carried on my own since before I could name it. The moon and the running wolf twined. It had not been there a breath before. It rose because in the same breath she chose. I saw the choosing and the mark together, the one calling the other up out of her skin. And outside, the monsoon that had run without stop since the night she came, that had rained on her handover and her every day in my hold, the rain stopped. All at once. The drum of it on the eaves simply ceased, and through the tall windows the clouds tore open on a wet gold evening light, and the moon wolf, out in the trees, howled long and joyful into the sudden quiet. Neve looked at the silver mark on her wrist. She looked at me. And for the first time since she had climbed out of the ford, she smiled. Not the small, braced, not-quite smile she wore like armor, but a true one, wide and wet and disbelieving. The smile of someone who has spent her whole life being told she is a burden and has just been told, by a king and a forest and an ancient wolf and her own waking blood, that she is a treasure. "Then I choose to stay," she said, steady, sure, hers. "Not as a debt, not as a gift, not because the gate was open or shut. I choose to stay because I want to, Alpha King. Because for the first time in my life someone opened the door and told me I could go and I found I didn't want to. I want to stay with you. I have led charges. I have faced councils. I have never done anything in my life as hard as keeping still and letting her cross the last of that ground herself. But she crossed it, my mate, on her own 2 feet as she had crossed the ford, and she put her marked wrist into my hand, and the bond closed over the both of us at last, warm as a hearth in a house that had been cold far too long. And the pack of Alvith, without a signal, without a word, bowed to her this time, and to me beside her. And it was the same bow, and it meant the same thing, and I will hear it in my heart until I die. Seth found her voice somewhere in the ruin of her plan. She is Pharaoh, the bond can't simply. "The bond does not ask your leave, Seth," I said, without looking at her because I could not look away from Neve's face. "It never has. You spent 11 years telling this woman she was worth nothing, and then you spent her, and now the moon and the wolves and the whole green country have told you what she's worth, and it is more than the Pharaoh will ever hold. You gave her away, and it is the one debt in this hall that can never be undone, and you will ride home tonight and live the rest of your life knowing you had the greatest treasure of your line under your roof, and threw it in a river to be rid of it. That is your punishment, and I did not choose it, and it is perfect, and I would not lift a finger to lighten it. Go home. The blood debt will be settled in silver by the equinox. Neve stays because Neve chooses. We are done." They went, Seth and her hungry daughter and her dozen armed, back up the mountain into the clearing evening, carrying a shame that no story they told would ever quite scrub off. Let the Highlands laugh now. Let them count what they lost. I have never spared them a second thought, and neither in the years since has Neve, which is the sweetest vengeance of all, not that she hates them, but that she is too full of a good life to remember to. Bracken came to her that night, my hard second who had wanted her whipped. He knelt in front of the whole hall, which Bracken had not done to anything but his own dead, and he said in a voice like gravel, "I called you a debt at the gate, Luna. I called for the whip. I have a brother in the ground at that pass, and I wanted his blood paid in yours, and I was wrong, and I have been wrong out loud for 3 years, and I'll be right out loud for the rest of them. Forgive me or don't, it's yours to give. But I'll guard you and yours till I'm in the ground beside him, and that's a vow, not an apology." And Neve, who could have made him crawl, who had earned the right to, reached down and took my grim second by the shoulder and drew him up to his feet and said, "Stand up, Bracken. I don't need you kneeling. I need you standing, because I'm going to be the Luna of a half-wild pack in a hard green country, and I've never done it before, and I'm going to need every strong soul in this hall standing up beside me. Your brother would want you standing too, I think. Let's give the pass a better memory than the one it has." I married her in the green of the next moon, in the teak hall with the windows open on the fern and the river, and the moon wolf lay in the doorway through the whole of it like an old grandfather too proud to come in and too fond to stay away, and half the touched pups of Alvith whole now, gentled, healed by her hands over the turning of that season, tangled underfoot in a way no right is supposed to allow, and every soul in the hall was too happy to stop. I set no crown on her. She asked me not to. "I've spent enough of my life being handed things by other people," she said. "Let me just stand next to you. That's the only seat I ever wanted." So she stood next to me, my Luna, my mate, the treasure a proud, poor mountain threw in a river, and I have never once in the years since sat a day without her at my side. People come to Alvith now to have her mend what no one else can, the fevered, the half-turned, the wild-eyed young that other packs would have put down. They come up my ford in the rain, the way she came, braced for cruelty, and they find the gate open and the Luna waiting with a basket of fever root and a shepherd's song under her breath, and they leave healed, and they cannot ever quite say how. I can say how. I watch her do it every day. It is the same thing she did to a lonely king and a half-wild pack and an ancient guardian wolf. She is not afraid of the broken thing, and she does not reach for it, and she lets it come to her and find, at last, that here is a soul that will not run, and that, it turns out, is what heals nearly everything if you have enough of it. And she has more than anyone I have ever known, because she went so long without any that she learned exactly how much it is worth. Sometimes in the deep green evenings I take out the old ledgers. I still keep them. A king must, and Neve looks over my shoulder at the long columns of silver and grain and debts settled and owed. And she teases me for it, and I let her, because there is one page I keep that has no numbers on it at all. It is the page from the night of the pledge cup, the night they handed me the girl no pack wanted. There is one line written there, in my own hand, from that first cold hour, and I wrote it before I told a living soul, when the bond had just struck me, and I did not yet know if she would stay a single night. It says, the Pharaoh have paid the blood debt of 12, and I have paid nothing, and it is I who am forever in their debt, and they will never know it, and I will never tell them. They tried to hand me a burden and be rid of it. They handed me the whole worth of my life instead, and rode home laughing, certain I'd send her back by the next moon. I never sent her back. There was never a moon bright enough in all the green years of Alvith to make me let her go.